Hello, my fellow film collectors. The other day, I had the pleasure of chatting with the guys from Deaf Crocodile, Craig Rogers and Dennis Bartok. We had a lengthy conversation all about their label, Deaf Crocodile, and the future of the label, with some very exciting things coming, including new titles and a new partnership with DiabolikDVD. So we get into all of that in the conversation you're about to listen to. And these guys are very knowledgeable about film history and the industry. And honestly, I'm a bit in awe of everything that they know. So hopefully you find it as enlightening as I did. Without further ado, let's get on with the show. So, Craig, Dennis, thank you very much for joining me today. You guys are from the Deaf Crocodile label. And if you wouldn't mind, could you give us a quick elevator pitch on what it is that you do at the label? And I'll let whoever wants to jump in first go for it.
Go for it, Dennis.
So we are Deaf Crocodile. I'm Dennis, and my distribution partner and great friend is Craig. We've actually worked together now for about 10 years. This is our third distribution and restoration company together. We started at a company called Cinelicious Picks.
I can't believe that was 10 years ago.
I
That's
know,
crazy.
isn't that amazing? And I helped launch the distribution division, and Craig was in charge of restoration for the parent company. And we licensed, and Craig restored films like Eiichi Yamamoto's psychedelic anime Belladonna of Sadness, and Toshio Matsumoto's A Funeral, A Parade of Roses, Private Property, number of very cool films. And then we co-founded Arbalos, where Craig restored Bellatar's 7.5 Hour Satan Tango and a bunch of other projects. And then 3 years ago, is that right? I think we I can't keep track of these details. We started Deaf Crocodile, and we do a really eclectic mix of about 75-80% older titles and about 20-25% newer films. Our sweet spot is kind of the intersection of art house and genre filmmaking. We do a lot of world cinema titles, world animation. Some of the films we've released recently are the Czech director Jiří Barta's version of The Pied Piper, 4 films by the legendary Russian fantasy director Alexander Patushko, Ilya Muromets' Sampo, The Tale of Tsar Sultan, and now upcoming Ruslan and Ludmilla, his final film. We've put out 2 kind of long unseen Romanian animated sci-fi films from the 80s. Delta Space Mission and The Son of the Stars by the directing team of Kalin Kazan and Mircea Toia. Number of Hungarian animated films, Cat City, Heroic Times, and just this February, Georgi Kovashnai's wonderful animated musical Bubble Bath. So we do a really eclectic mix of movies from around the world.
And we've got some newer titles that didn't make a physical media release, but they're available streaming for rental and purchase from India and South Asia. So we've got The Village House and Duin, both from Achal Mishra, incredible films. Children of the Sun is another historical drama that's really good. Boomba Ride is a amazing film about this little boy that wants to go to an English school. Um, there's some really good stuff that we've got available digitally that people should definitely check out. That they're, we don't have a disc of, but they're really great films.
We've also put out 5 more recent films from Iranian filmmakers. 4 from the director Sharam Mokri. We put out a box set of his work, including Fish and Cat, which is his incredible single shot meditation on like 70s American slasher horror films, and Careless Crime, which is inspired by this terrible terrorist attack that set fire to the Cinema Rex in Iran and helped trigger the Iranian Revolution. And then we just released last month World War III by Human Sayedi, who is a well-known Iranian filmmaker and actor, which is this kind of savage class thriller, a little bit like Lee Chang-dong's Burning or Parasite. Amazing movie that is hopefully going to get better known here. It was Iran's official submission for Best Foreign Film at last year's Oscars and won 2 awards at the Venice Film Festival. So we try to also, while we're kind of researching and helping to restore older titles, to shine a light on some of the new films that we really love.
Yeah, World War III is pretty incredible. Walter Chaw did a commentary track for it, and he messaged after he'd watched it that he was like, "This was incredible." He's like, "I'm so glad you asked me to do this," because he's like, I probably would never have seen it, and he's like, it's raced up to the top of my best watches this year. So yeah, it's a great film.
That's something I was going to just mention is that, and I said this in my recent video, all of the films that you've released, I had never heard of before coming across your label. And I think a lot of people will be quite similar in that regard. You really are championing these films and kind of bringing them to new audiences, helping keep them alive. But how do you find the films? How do you discover these films, first of all? Are they films that you've known for a very long time? Do you find them when they come to the market, so to speak, for distribution? How do you discover these films?
Yeah, I think a lot of them have been on Dennis's radar. Like he's had a wish list of like, well, if I ever had a distribution company, I'd love to put these out. And now he has a distribution company, and he's like a little kid going shopping. He's just like, all my favorites, I got to find them. Uh, so yeah, he most of them are films Dennis has known for years and has been tracking down how do we get them. Um, we've had some great suggestions that people send in. They're like, "Hey, have you heard of this?" And sometimes we're like, "No," and we look into it. We're like, "Oh, that looks incredible." So we a lot of those emails always come with like an apology, like sorry to bother you, but like, and it was like, no, look, please send suggestions. It's like, you know, nobody knows every film, so uh,
Yes, if anyone watching this has a suggestion, you can reach us at Dennis@deafcrocodile.com or Craig@deafcrocodile.com. We do get some great suggestions. Our great friend Jonathan Marlowe, who co-founded Fandor and is just a kind of a wonderful film lover and mover and shaker, suggested this amazing psychedelic underwater animated Danish musical to us about a year and a half ago called Benny's Bathtub. And he said, oh, it's got this amazing kind of pop jazz soundtrack. It's sort of like Harry Nilsson's The Point meets Yellow Submarine. You guys must know this. And I was like, no, I've never seen Benny's Bathtub. So we tracked it down and licensed it and interviewed the co-director and who the one of the two who's still with us, put out a bunch of other short films that he's been involved with, and that came out last year. So that was a film that literally was a suggestion from someone we know and trust. Well, I was going to say Alexander Pacheco I've loved for like 25 years. I organized a retrospective here in LA of his films in the early 2000s with our friend Oliver Lotsky at Seagull Films that toured around to other cinematheques in the US. So I've been a huge admirer of his movies. And then the film we're putting out in July is this amazing Belarusian folk horror film from the late 70s called The Savage Hunt of King Stack by Valery Rubinchik. And that's actually been on my radar for over 30 years. Somebody mentioned it to me in the early 90s, and I said, that sounds fascinating. So that literally has taken over 3 decades to track down. It took years to license the rights from Belarus Film, and now Craig is just finishing up, like today, tomorrow, his restoration of the 2-hour director's cut of the movie that we're releasing, I think maybe for the first time anywhere on physical media, certainly the first time on Blu-ray. I don't even think it came out on DVD in July.
Yeah, and I was mentioning about Benny's Bathtub. It immediately reminded me of the Peanut specials, because it's an animated children's film, but the soundtrack is this incredible jazz music, that it's just it's a level of music that's kind of elevate. It's not the kind of music you think, oh, this is what the little kids are going to want to hear in the animated film. It's like this incredible music. And like when I was a little kid, I fell in love with the music in Peanuts. So like it introduced me to jazz, which I feel like that's probably what Benny did, in when it came out, is introduce kids to a type of music they probably wouldn't have been exposed to.
It also
Yeah,
introduced them to topless animated mermaids.
That's true. Well, maybe. I mean, that might be shocking for us here.
Kids' entertainment in Denmark in the early 70s was very different.
Yeah,
Clearly, they did not have nearly as many hang-ups about the human body, because there are,
I don't think anyone outside the U.S. has as many hang-ups about the human body.
but it is, you're watching the film and it's about like a 10-year-old boy who gets sucked through the drain in his bathtub and discovers this incredible undersea world with this psychedelic polka dotted singing octopus and all these different undersea creatures, very much like kind of Disney's The Little Mermaid. And then suddenly a bunch of topless mermaids kind of swim into view singing, and your jaw hits the floor. And it's a beloved classic in Denmark. It's been entered into their country's like official cultural canon, alongside novels by like Isaac Dinesen and the films of Carl Theodor Dreyer. So it's like, and it's an amazing film, but it's very sophisticated. Obviously, both adults and kids can really dig it. So
Craig, does that put extra pressure on you because you're handling some of the restoration process on these films? Because I know some other labels will just be given a file and then they just put the file on a disc, whereas you're actively engaging with the restoration.
It depends on the release. Benny's Bathtub was delivered to us restored, so I didn't have to do anything on that one. But others, no, it's a digital file, so I don't worry about it. Like, I'm not going to ruin anything, you know. Like, if someone handed me the negative to a classic film and they're like, "Here, scan this," I would be terrified. Um, but it was just like anything I do in digitally, I can just Control Z. I'm like, oops, okay, I have to get rid of that. Like, um, and yeah, and what I want the end result to look like is it doesn't matter the film, like the standard I want to reach is the same regardless of the title.
well, we have a big advantage because Craig is such a wizard at restoration, so we're able to go after and kind of tackle projects that would probably be financially too, ambitious for a lot of other labels. So many of the films that we put out, we are paying to do new scans off of the camera negative or the best surviving materials, last year we put out this amazing Croatian sci-fi fantasy film by animator Dusan Vukotic, one of his rare live action movies called Visitors from the Arcana Galaxy. And to do it, we had to pay for a new scan off of the best available 35 millimeter materials and sound transfer. Son of the Stars, the Romanian animated sci-fi film, we paid for a new scan. One of our big projects, Craig, maybe you want to talk about, is Michael Schack's Felidae. It's kind of been on our wish list for years, and many people have asked us about it.
Yeah, I'm very excited about that one. I'm a crazy cat person, so doing a animated cat film brings me much joy.
Our third, and we're doing
Well, yeah,
three.
it is our third. This is the first one that I'm doing the full restoration on, though. So yeah, it was weirdly difficult to get the contract signed and the elements scanned. Um, I don't know why. It shouldn't have been that difficult, but it was. But eventually it got done, and we've got beautiful 4K scans of the original negative. And I'm looking forward to really diving into that. That it'll be our first 4K HDR release, um, and yeah, it's going to look amazing. We were able to get in touch with a bunch of the original animators and character designers, and Dennis did this really cool, like 40th, right? No,
It was
30th,
made
30th. Yeah,
early.
it's the 30th. Yeah, 30th anniversary. So he did this great interview, like reunion with a bunch of the people that were involved.
All over the world, here in LA and Dublin and Canada. It was the most expensive animated feature made in Germany at the time in the early 90s. And it was based on a series of best-selling, kind of, I guess you would say, young adult novels. They're occult mysteries set in the world of domestic cats. So it involves ritual sacrifice and a kind of kitty Sherlock Holmes who's trying to figure out why these cats are being sacrificed, and ancient mysteries, and there's simulated cats having sex, there's cat dissections, there's cat decapitations. It's like an R-rated, it's like an R-rated version of The Secret of Nim or An American Tale. So it looks like a Don Bluth movie, and in fact, the reason why is because a number of the people who worked on it had actually worked for Don Bluth in the 80s and early 90s. But it's much closer in tone to something like The Plague Dogs or Watership Down, where it's really not meant for kids, which was a big problem when they released the film, is they advertised it to kids who came in and were like crying and hiding their eyes, like, oh my God, what's happening?
and all of that came from the top down. Like we've got they gave us access to tons of character designs and drawings and sketches, and they were aware that the content was much more adult and dark than the Don Bluth art style that they were told to give it. So, like, we've got some sketches where he's done character designs and he's given them a little word balloon that says, "This looks a little too Don Bluth, doesn't it?" So, so yeah, they and then when it came out, like the poster is just like this happy cat. So yeah, they were kind of like, just in shock that the marketing, the route they were going to try and sell this, they were like, do they know what this is? Like,
No, it's really dark and
yeah,
nightmarish, and it's been, I don't want to say suppressed, but let's say maybe willfully ignored, because the writer of the books that it was based on is a Turkish German immigrant who, in the past few years, has come out as a real kind of right wing personality, very anti immigrant in Germany, and uh, has made it really uncomfortable, for all the people who kind of loved these books. And when we approached the company that has the rights, they at one point tried to talk us out of licensing it. They said, "Why do you want to release this film? Do you realize the books that it's?" And I was like, "Yeah, actually, the book that it's based on kind of has nothing to do with his later, political statements,
Hmm.
and we love the film."
I was going to say, is that something that you then are going to explore on the disc in the features, or is it just not relevant, particularly to the film, if he wasn't involved?
Well, certainly, I think in the commentary, and we did ask all of the animators and the filmmaker for their thoughts, but they weren't well because when they made the film, that wasn't part of the conversation. This all came out much later. Yeah, it didn't actually have anything to do with why the film was not successful. That was more that it was a really dark, violent, kind of R-rated Don Bluth movie. There still isn't a mass kind of audience for R-rated feature animation for the most part. That's like that's a really tough nut to crack. Like anime has managed to do a lot more sort of adult themes and more ambitious for TV and features, but there aren't a ton of like Don Bluth style films with cat decapitations and simulated cat sex in them, and a theme song by Boy George, which is amazing. Uh, so that and it's a really good thing that we took the initiative. We've paid for a scan off of the original camera negative because when they pulled it at the lab in Germany, they said, "Oh, the negative is suffering from pretty advanced vinegar syndrome, so the negative is decaying." And they're like, "It'll go through the scanner now, but in a couple of years, you're
Yeah, I mean,
probably not."
considering it's only 30 years old, that means that it wasn't stored properly. Like,
Yeah,
if the temperature and humidity had been correct, that negative should have been pristine, which
yeah,
is just sad. It's like it's only 30 years old.
Hmm.
You always talk about films that get lost or negatives that are destroyed. Everyone's always thinking about the silent era. Like, this was from 1994.
Wow.
Like things need to be stored properly. If they're stored properly, they can last a long time. But if it's just thrown in a closet, it's not going to last.
I was going to say, so you mentioned that it's going to be your first 4K UHD release, right? So what was the kind of thought process on that? Going for a 4K UHD disc, is it more complicated? What kind of extra things does it bring up?
It's just a bunch of different things come together that make this one make sense. One, it's a 4K scan from the original negative, so uh, I hear a lot of things coming out on 4K disc that are they're scans from a print or an IP or an IN. I was like, there's not even 4K of information on that element, so I don't want to waste our money and put out something that people are going to expect to think look amazing, and then it doesn't. Like, I want to make sure that on a technical level it makes sense, you know, as well as a financial level. So it does cost a lot more because the color grade costs a lot more. The authoring costs a lot more. The manufacturing costs more. Um, so from a technical standpoint, it needs to make sense, and then from a financial standpoint, it needs to make sense. And it's a title that a lot of people have kind of been clamoring for. It's animated, which has a core audience built in. So it's come up a lot online that there's a lot of fans that are just like 4K or I don't want it, and that needs to be some there needs to be some pushback or some education done that doesn't always make sense either technically or financially. Um, there's plenty of discs that the Blu-ray looks fantastic, and adding the level of cost and uh, involved to go 4K when on a technical level, it's not going to really be that much better. I understand the HDR is different, even if you don't have the resolution, but considering how much it costs and how much more effort it takes, it's just that alone isn't reason enough. And yeah, and a title it's going to have to sell well to cover those added costs. Um, so yeah, so not every title makes sense.
Well, and the other thing, which Elliot, I'm guessing you're well aware of, is that when you go in to do an HDR grade, you are changing a really important visual element of the film. In many cases, the original filmmaker and or cinematographers are not, they're not alive anymore. So it's whatever colorist is doing that HDR grade, and that can have a really big impact on the tone, the visual style of the film that may not, in fact, reflect what the filmmaker or cinematographer wanted. So just doing an HDR grade, it's people think it's kind of like a neutral process. It's like it's not. Color grade is really subjective.
Right, and it's not necessarily just a matter of what the filmmaker wanted back then. It was also what they could do. So, like for example, when we restored Dennis Hopper's The Last Movie, um, we screened the last print that had been approved by Dennis and the cinematographer, so we could see this is what they wanted it to look like. And we also had the added benefit of being in the room there with somebody who was in the room when they screened it. Because there was one particular thing that I found really interesting, and it was crucial that we knew this, or otherwise we would have graded it differently. Is Dennis wanted the skies to never be blown out. So like if he's in the foreground and there's a sky behind him, he wanted the sky to not blow out, and he's like, if that puts me in shadow, so be it. The That's the opposite of how almost every other film would have done it. It's always the actors what's important. If the sky blows out, whatever, it's the background. But he wanted it the other way around. But that's also because he knew he could have one or the other and he couldn't have both. Today, if you scan that negative with an HDR grade, you could have both. You could have the nice blue sky and fluffy clouds and have him lit properly. He didn't have that option. So that makes it a very subjective thing. Now you come years later, what do you do? Yeah, you're making the whoever's doing that HDR grade has creative choices to make, um, which then leads to people bitching when things come out and they don't look exactly the same as they did. It's like because things have changed. There's technology that allows them to do things they couldn't do back then. Um, so if you got the filmmaker involved and they're like, oh no, I want the sky and my face to look right, then people are going to complain. Well, that's not what it looked like before. Or you don't have the filmmaker involved and they color grade it to so his face looks good and the sky blows out. Like it's very complicated and it's very subjective.
Yeah, that's why this whole rush to like put out re-release everything 4K UHD is, people, you know, need to make sure that it's done right, that it reflects the filmmaker's creative intentions if they're still alive. Craig, you should tell Elliot what Jiri Barta said after he saw your restoration of the Pied Piper.
That I was really nervous because I did the full restoration and I did the color grade on that one, and um, it's not live action, so it's a really subjective. Like, what is this supposed to look like? And so I focused on trying to get the wood to look like natural wood, and that did leave other things like the gold wasn't super bright, shiny gold. Um, and we luckily he was, he's still around, so we sent him some stills and sent him some clips, and he was delighted. He's like, this is actually the first time it's ever looked color wise the way it's supposed to look, because a lot of the color grades focused on like there's so much gold in it, and so they wanted it like nice bright gold, and he's like, no, it's not supposed to look like that.
Yeah, I think he said the previous releases on home video had all looked too blue.
Yeah.
There was a blue cast to a lot of the film, and he's like, thank God it doesn't look, all blue.
Well, it's an interesting conversation because I've got it here actually, and when I watched it for the first time, I hadn't seen it before, so I had no idea how it's meant to look. But when I watched it, I didn't think it looked unnatural at all. I thought this is how it is meant to look.
Well, a good example of I was very excited when there was a 4K HDR disc of Apocalypse Now came out, and I watched it, and that's a film I've seen many, many times. Every time they come out with a version, I buy it again. And I actually preferred the Blu-ray, particularly the last scenes with Brando. It felt like they were trying to let you see more in those scenes. Where every time I've seen it at the Cinerama Dome on 70 millimeter, I've seen every release of it, and it just seemed to me very obvious they wanted him in shadow, and you just see slivers of his face here and there coming in and out of the shadows. And then on the HDR release, it was like they were trying to get as much information out of that dark area as possible. And I was like, it completely just didn't work for me. I was like, no, that's not right.
I saw it when it came out, first day of release, at a suburban Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania multiplex. Loved it then, still love it now. But for me, that's an example of they should have left the original version alone. Normally, I'm like, oh yeah, if there's extra material or director's cut, like Amadeus, do not watch the director's cut of Amadeus. And unfortunately, I think that's the only version that's available on Blu-ray right now, because it contains about, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes or more of extraneous footage, including some really unnecessary nudity that did not need to be in the film to begin with and shouldn't have been in the film. And the original cut is much, much better. And it's the same thing with Apocalypse Now. I think all the Redux versions and when I was an NYU film school student, I took a class with the editor of the film, who was brilliant editor, and she did an amazing job. And so every time you go in and you recut the film and add things, in a way, it distorts what was such a, in my estimation, kind of a perfect film to begin with. So
Unlike his friend George Lucas, Francis Ford Coppola always gives you the option of watching the original cut.
yes,
Like, that's always an option. You do not have to watch those other versions.
yes.
Yeah, we got really sidetracked again, didn't we?
I know we did. We got completely sidetracked. Going down the Apocalypse Now rabbit hole.
So speaking of discs, then I wanted to bring up DiabolikDVD, because I know there's a new relationship kind of forming between you and Diabolic. So did you guys want to talk about that?
Well, first of all, they share a name with one of my favorite Mario Bava films, Danger Diabolic. So we had to partner with Jesse and Diabolic just because they've got such a cool name. Yeah, we're going to start working with them as our distribution partner for physical media. Our first official release with them will be The Savage Hunt of King Stack in July, the Valery Rubinchik Belarusian folk horror movie that we mentioned earlier. That Craig's finishing a restoration of the 2-hour director's cut.
By the time this video comes out, we should have an official announcement that's come out, and some really cool imagery because we've got new packaging for our like deluxe editions. We're going beyond just a slipcover. So Our deluxe editions now are going to have a hard slipcase with a 60-page book, and we're commissioning not only a new artwork for the standard edition, but the case is going to have newly commissioned artwork from a different artist. Um, so, and even the standard edition, honestly, we just finished that up a couple days ago, and Dennis and I are both like holy shit, that's the best looking disc we've put out yet. Like the artwork, the wrap artwork is just it's really gorgeous.
Yeah, we should give more credit to some of the amazing artists and illustrators who we've worked with. Beth Morris is pretty much exclusively doing our wrap art, kind of moving forward.
Yeah,
And
the standard editions for the last few releases, and most of the stuff we got planned going forward, the standard editions are most likely going to feature her graphic design work, which has been just terrific.
oh yeah, like if you have Mysterious Castle and the Carpathians, she did both the slipcase and the wrap art, and she's just really brilliant. We've been really fortunate to work with Tony Stella on a number of our releases, including the
Yeah,
four.
all the Petrushko releases with Tony Stella. He did our first cover actually, Unknown Man of Shandagore. He did the slip cover, the wrap art. He did all the artwork for that. Um, and then the Kickstarter that just ended, the box that we've created to hold the Petrushko films. He did all new artwork for the box. So Tony Stella has done a lot of stuff for us, and incredible. And he's adamant to point out that it's not, none of it's digital. Those are all actual like paintings he does in his studio. So just incredible artwork, and how he can turn around a painting as quickly as he does sometimes is just like, dude, you're not human.
I know. I was going to say that because I've seen his work with so many other labels and his own commission pieces, and it's just incredible how quickly he does it.
And he's posting stuff on Twitter all the time of just things he's just done because he wanted to. I'm like, he's just a machine. Like, how are you? His output is incredible.
Well, and I should mention that Craig is a huge comics art and comic book graphic novel aficionado. He used to be a manager and represent comics artists, so he has contacts with a number of them, and so that's one of the things that we're exploring. Is so we commissioned Dave McKeon, who did the covers for the Sandman graphic novels comics with Neil Gaiman, and so he did artwork for the Kickstarter campaign we did for the Pied Piper, the Jiri Barta film we mentioned. It was really amazing. David Mack is going to be doing the slipcase artwork as another noted comics artist for the Savage Hunt of King Stack. So we're trying to reach out to some of these really cool, talented comics artists and illustrators.
I went a good friend and comic artist, Brian Level. Um,
Oh, he did. Yeah, he did the rap art for the Pied
oh
Piper.
yeah, the standard edition and the Vinegar Syndrome slipcover was all Brian Level, and he did our Deaf Crocodile logo. Um, that cool little croc is because of Brian Level, and he's gonna be doing some more fun stuff with us in the future.
So we to go back to Diabolic. I've been a fan and a patron of Diabolic for many years. I've bought many discs from Jesse and his company. We are big physical media fans ourselves. I mean, you can see some of my records there in the background. Um, I have huge shelves of Blu-rays and DVDs in the garage because there's so many of them. That's the only space we have that's big enough to hold them all. So so we wanted to partner with somebody that whose company we really admired. You know, I just bought. In fact, I received yesterday, the day before, the new Indicator discs of the Batwoman and the Panther Woman Mexican kind of horror, fantasy, lucha libre movies that I got from Diabolic.
And I've bought from Jesse through the years, and um, what struck me was his packaging. Like, I've bought from a lot of different places, and how the disc arrives can be a little sketchy sometimes. And his packaging was like rock solid. So for Deaf Crocodile, I've, you know, even in before that, the previous company, all of the shop orders that come directly, I pack and ship myself. And so I knew, okay, like the way Jesse does it was setting the standard. And I was like, all right, uh, plus it's like, you've spent all this time working on something, and then the last step is getting it to the customer. And I don't want it to end up, they get it broken. So, it's really important that we send our baby out. It doesn't, get there broken. And so with Jesse, I was just like, it'll be safe for him to take over fulfillment. Like, our customers are going to be taken care of.
Well, and I should also mention that we have nothing but positive things to say about our experience with OCN Vinegar Syndrome. We really appreciate the almost 3 years we spent with them as a partner label. They helped get us started to grow a fan base. We put out some wonderful releases with them that, we were fortunate that they did really well, were really well received. Just in terms of wanting to grow our company, because this is Deaf Crocodile. I mean, we work with a lot of outside, independent contractors and wonderful film scholars and writers who do essays and commentaries and archives and various people. So of course we don't do this on our own, but in terms of the company itself, it's Craig and me. And so at some point we would love to be able to expand. And I think to do that, the next logical step is to, kind of spread our wings a bit more, which is why we're partnering with Jesse and Diabolic. But we have really enjoyed our time with OCN Vinegar Syndrome, and likewise, I continue to buy Vinegar Syndrome discs, and I'm sure I will in the future. They've put out some really cool, amazing movies, and they've helped. One of the things I really like about them and labels like Severin and Arrow is uh, there's no kind of like this is high art or low art, or this is exploitation trash cinema, this is art cinema. It's like if it's good film, that's what we're interested in. Where everything's kind of on a level playing field. And I think that's what's really cool about a lot of the boutique labels out there is they are taking a lot of genre filmmaking, kind of off the radar filmmaking much more seriously, in terms of restoration, presentation, all the bonus features, essays, commentary. So you're able to, Paul Naschy, the great Spanish horror filmmaker and star, is like my favorite example. 10, 15 years ago, it was literally impossible to see most Paul Naschy films except in like old, badly dubbed VHS copies, a handful of DVD releases that were really sketchy. And now you can see many of his best movies in beautiful Blu-ray, and even now they're starting to do 4K UHD releases, I think, which to me is mind-blowing. That Paul Naschy's films, which were off the radar for so many years. I remember years ago, I used to organize a series of films from Spain, the American Cinematheque, where I was the head of programming, mostly new films, but then we would do a retrospective on a major filmmaker or actor as part of it. And at one point I mentioned Paul Naschy, and the response was like, "Are you kidding? Like, no, we don't consider that to be good Spanish cinema." And I was like, well, that's a shame, because I think there's a lot of people that really like Paul Naschy's movies. And now, amazingly, they can enjoy them in beautiful Blu-ray editions. So that to me is one of the coolest things. If you're a consumer, if you're a film lover, film buff, film fan, there are so many avenues to access and enjoy a lot of these really wonderful and obscure treasures than there were 10, 15, 20 years ago. But also, tip my hat to the pioneering labels like Anchor Bay and Image and companies like that who kind of paved the way for uncovering a lot of these rare treasures.
Yeah, and for a lot of the particularly genre cinema or cinema that until fairly recently has been looked down upon, uh, I think the added content of having essays and visual essays and commentary puts it all into perspective and gives you insight that you wouldn't necessarily get just watching the film. So like the fact that the boutique labels always usually include that stuff as well, I think is really crucial. Which is partly, like I was saying, like our deluxe editions now we're expanding even further. Like our booklets, we always included a good essay. The booklets are now going to be at least 60 pages, and so we're going to have probably at least two longer form essays. So we're trying to expand on the additional content that puts the films in context even more.
Well, and moving forward, I think pretty much all of our releases will have at least one essay by Walter Chaw, who's one of our favorite film writers, film critics, film historians.
Yeah, I read a couple of his things and instantly was like, this is the greatest film writer I've ever read. And I reached out to him. I was like, hey, would you be interested in writing an essay for us? And he wrote back and was like, he's like, oh, I'd be thrilled to. He's like, it'd be an honor. And I was just like, oh my God, this is so exciting. So after he did a couple, I was like, would you write something for all our releases? And he's like, absolutely. So like, yeah, we're going all in on Walter Chaw. Very excited.
and we've worked with a number of people for commentary repeatedly, like Sam Deegan, who's worked. She's wonderful. Stephen Bissett has done a number of commentaries for us. Who's also really amazing.
Yeah, the amount of research he's done on the Patushko releases and the commentary tracks, like he's got this really. I think it helped because he was a teacher for a while, so he's got this really great ability to give you a lot of information, but in an easy way to bring it all in. So it's very like conversational, but it's a ton of information. So like Ruslan and Ludmilla, he was like that was a marathon because that's a long film, and he doesn't yeah and he doesn't leave like big gaps of like, okay, we're just gonna watch the movie for a while and I'll come back. uh, he goes 2.5 hours, like and it's brilliant. It's entertaining. It's not a drag at all. Like it's not just dry facts. Like he's fin, and I think he's really excited about it. It's like a new thing within the last few years that he's starting to get more labels asking him to do commentary tracks, and I think he seems to be very excited to do it, and it's like he enjoys doing it, and he's like a newfound like career in retirement.
Well, Stephen is really well known as a comics artist. So he did the saga of Swamp Thing with Alan Moore, as kind of his most famous work, but is also a film writer, film historian, longtime friends with Tim Lucas and his late wife Donna, who were the publishers of Video Watchdog magazine, and so Stephen did a conversation with me that is on our latest release. Just started pre-sales for Georgi Danilia's amazing Soviet sci-fi film Kin Zaza, which we're putting out on Blu-ray this month. And so Stephen and I did a whole conversation about the the kind of genre of Soviet fantastica, which includes sci-fi, fantasy, and horror. So on the one hand, you have directors like Tarkovsky with Solaris and Stalker, or Danilia with Kin Zaza, or other Pavel Klushantsev, or some of the great sci-fi filmmakers of the 50s and 60s. But it also includes fantasy films by like Alexander Rowe and Alexander Patushko, and the rare Soviet horror films. And we're releasing one of the few, which is Savage Hunt of King Stack. It's folk horror, but it does contain elements of horror, and Belarus was part of the USSR at the time it came out, so it is, I guess, technically, quote unquote, or certainly a Soviet era horror or horror adjacent movie, but it's really beautiful and melancholy and surreal. I kind of describe it as a mix of The Wicker Man, 60s Hammer horror, and Terry Gilliam. And it's beautiful and atmospheric and has a lot of strange, wonderfully surreal elements. If you've ever seen Malpertui, it's got some kind of similarities to that, the wonderful Kumel film. So
The Hammer films immediately came to mind to me when I saw it. I was like, oh, this would have fit right into their library.
so that we are super excited about that it's going to have a new video essay on it, by a film historian named Evan Chester, who has a pretty big following on YouTube and does really wonderful video essays about like Eastern European animation and different subjects. There's a wonderful video introduction by Kirla Janice, who from Woodlands Dark and Days Bewitched, and who also works with Severin and does brilliant work there. So we're really fortunate that we've got some really great collaborators and partners to help talk about the movie.
Yeah. It sounds like there's so much exciting stuff to come. Just from what we've talked about here, I'm very excited to see the future of Deaf Crocodile.
We're going to try later in the year. It might kill us both. We're going to try doing 2 releases in a single month. So we're going to start experimenting with upping the frequency for.
Well, I remember when we were doing Satan Tango, and you guys are like plotting out like the schedule of release, and like you were counting that as one film. I was like, no.
I think what we need is a cloning machine to clone Craig. So you've got multiple copies of Craig to do it all at once.
Well, and in fact, there's a classic 1930s horror title that we would love to do. We were looking into doing a new scan and restoration from the best surviving materials, and the problem is that it would probably take 3 to 6 months of solid work on Craig's part, doing nothing else, to properly restore the film from the
Well, given that film's pedigree and the the pretty darn high quality elements that they had, I wouldn't have felt right doing anything but like the absolute like best I could, and that would have meant a lot, like every frame manually, like cleaning up every single frame, which it would have taken forever.
yeah.
And we just didn't have the time.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't completely given up, but hopefully someone who has more resources and time, it's like we can't put everything else aside so that Craig can devote 3 to 6 months to a single film.
Yeah, for that film would have meant that we would go like, probably 3 months without a release, and then we'd grow broke and fold up. So
Yeah, we have to look at projects and say, well, how much is this going to cost to license the film, to if we have to do a new scan and the audio transfer, and then there's all of the restoration work. And so all that money is kind of invested and frozen in the project until you can bring it to market. So really the question is like, how much time and how much in terms of our company resources can we invest in a project that could take months or even years to actually come out. So each of the films that we put out represents a really significant investment in time and resources that have been kind of poured into that, and you don't actually start seeing anything back until it comes out. And even then, the first revenue that comes in, you're basically just repaying
Yeah,
yourself for all the money that you've invested.
trying to get back to zero.
Yeah, no, you're trying to first break even and then make quote unquote profit. So, as we found out from our accountants this year, when you license films, we're like, oh my God, we've got a huge tax bill. How can that be? They're like, you made all this money in 2023. And we're like, yes, but we don't have that. We don't have that money in the bank. What are you talking about? And it turns out because we licensed a lot of films, that represents an asset that we then need to have on our books as a company, even though we don't actually have that cash in hand. Yes, we have a library of films that we haven't exploited yet. So,
Yeah, the money we pay up front for a title can only be expensed over the length of that contract. So if we license a film for 7 years and we pay $10,000 for it, well, we paid $10,000 for it today, but that doesn't come off our books. It comes off our books across 7 years,
Yeah.
which then leads to you owe taxes.
I know.
So I suppose, is that why the Kickstarter can help sometimes as a way of changing the cash flow situation?
That definitely helps and it's there's absolutely no getting around that. The past Kickstarter was a phenomenal success. But I also worry that people are going to see that and think like, well, they're flush with cash now. It's like, well, we need to pay for getting the box produced, those slipcovers produced, all 4 of those discs produced, pay the artists, pay the authoring, pay the manufacturing, um, and then we have to the rights holders get
Rights
half of
holders
that.
get half
So
of 50%
so
of like
yeah, so
we yeah, almost everything we put out, we pay 50% of the back end.
yeah, so it's definitely helpful, but yeah, it's not like, oh well, we have no money problems now.
So I guess, and maybe this is a bit more of a difficult question, but is there ever a case where you're preparing a release and you get to the point where you're worried, is this actually going to do it for people or not? Because I guess there is a risk involved there from you guys in what you release.
Well, especially since we specialize in films nobody's ever heard of.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, like we rarely get the benefit of like a built-in like, oh, people know this, they want this. Uh, but at the same time, I've I've been working with Dennis, like we said, 10 years, um, and like I've I've come to realize like there's a he does have a great ability to find these things or know these films that they are genuinely good, even if you've not heard of them, which really warms my heart because I see comments online quite often when they describe Deaf Crocodile as they're a blind buy every month, and people just trust. They're like, I know I've never heard of it, but they've not let me down yet, um, which just feels great. Like, because I know like buying something on disc that you've never seen before, particularly from a boutique label. So it's not, this isn't a $6.99 Blu-ray. This is people are spending good money to buy a film they've never seen before. Like, that's awesome. Like, and we really appreciate it. It's not lost on us that what people are doing. Like, that's awesome.
Oh yeah, and we love all of the movies that we've put out. Like that's, I mean, we're huge fans. We're lucky enough to be able to shine a light on the work of some amazing filmmakers, many of whom, you know, were for whatever reason had slipped through the cracks. Like we've become good friends with Kalin Kazan, who's the amazing Romanian animator and co-director of Delta Space Mission and Son of the Stars, and he's just kind of astonished that, you know, almost 40 years after he made these movies, and you know, in his mind, they had sort of vanished into history. Now they've been rediscovered, you know, and there's a whole generation of fans now of his and Merchatoya's wonderful feature films.
Solomon King was completely forgotten and lost, and the fact that we were able to track it down and restore it and bring it back, uh, honestly, I think my favorite part of that whole story is that we basically gave that film back to Sal's family. Uh, his whole family is just so thrilled to be able to see the film that their dad or their uncle worked on, um, and made, and they'd never seen it, or they'd just seen a clip of it online or something. Like, we were at a screening in, I think it was the screening up in San Francisco, and so a lot of the family was there because they're from that area. And so the first scene where Sal comes on screen, I just heard this woman behind me just yell out. She's like, "That's my daddy!" And it was like, "Oh, that is so awesome."
Well, and we've become really dear friends with his wife, his widow, Belinda Burton Watts, who appears in the film and you know, manages the estate now. And we've also been able
All
to,
right.
you know, pay her uh, a really nice stream of royalties from the film that her husband and she made in the mid 1970s in Oakland that she thought was kind of lost forever. Um, and I dearly love Belinda. She's like, I basically believe in Providence and that the good Lord kept me alive, waiting for that day when my phone rang and I picked it up and it was you guys saying, "Hey, you don't know us, but we want to find and restore your late husband Sal's movie, Solomon King."
And that disc has a lengthy interview with Belinda. That's, I mean, if the film wasn't on that disc, that interview with her alone is worth buying that disc. It's so interesting, talking about her life, and it's so good. Like, we've said from the beginning, the more we got to know her and the more we got to know the story of Sal Watts, like, a documentary filmmaker needs to do a documentary, a full on feature length documentary on that story would be so good.
You should no, because Sal was sort of like Oakland's answer to Berry Gordy in the 70s. He had record labels. He produced kind of local soul funk cable TV programs. He was a filmmaker. He owned restaurants. He owned a string of black urban fashion stores, Mr. Sal's Fashions. And so he had all of these amazing entrepreneurial and creative projects going on in the 70s. And then he ran into legal financial troubles with taxes. He wound up going to jail really tragically, and it kind of broke his health and his momentum. And he died in 2003. But working with Belinda and restoring the film, we've been able to tell their story and kind of preserve and talk about this amazing moment in Oakland's Black culture and music and film and media. And that to us, which was kind of so exciting about taking on the restoration of Solomon King, and we swap messages a couple times a week with Belinda. We absolutely adore her, and so glad that we've been able to tell her story and Sal's through the re-release of the film. So.
And that whole project began with Dennis's vinyl collecting. He found the soundtrack, and he's like, I've never heard of this film. And then he sent me a clip. There was a YouTube clip of one of the songs, and he's like, oh, I just found this soundtrack. He's like, check this out. And as soon as I heard the music, I'm like, we need to find that film. The soundtrack is absolutely incredible. And we're still planning on putting out a new vinyl release of the soundtrack with super rare like B-sides that were on some of the singles that were released. And it's just, we're not music distributors, so it's a steep learning curve, and we want to make sure we do it right, but that's still on our to-do list.
Yeah, we're just trying to clear some of the rights with the publisher who controls a number of the songs on the soundtrack. They were all very obscure, incredibly talented local Oakland, California soul funk artists. And somewhere over there in that all those shelves is the copy of the Solomon King soundtrack that I bought. And I started looking it up, and all the references I saw were lost film. And I was like, well, that's kind of what we do, is we find lost movies. So I was like, Craig, let's find this one, which I know sounds really like there's usually a very good reason why lost movies are lost.
Yeah, but you've developed your detective skills for tracking down films. Like, you've gotten really good at it, like finding family members and stuff. Like, you've got that down to a science at this point.
We're pretty persistent about trying to locate things that we sort of passionately believe in. But my apologies, guys. I'm actually going to have to jump off and wrap this up, because I could keep talking for 2 more hours.
I know. I was just going to say that I could listen to you guys and ask you questions all day, but yeah, thanks so much for taking the time, just to be here.
That was great. It was great to meet you and talk to you. And like I said, I watch your YouTube channel quite often, so it's good to meet you in person. Well, semi in person.
Oh, thanks very much. So that was my discussion with Craig and Dennis from Deaf Crocodile. We had to cut it short, but honestly, we could have gone on for hours and hours. So fingers crossed we'll get to do this again in the near future. If you enjoyed this conversation and would like more of this sort of thing from the channel, then please do leave a comment down below. For more videos on Deaf Crocodile, just click the one that's presented on screen right now. I go into their recent Kickstarter project and I talk about some of my favourite releases in their catalogue. Until next time, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you soon.